Okay, we'll just give it a minute before we get started. People are coming in more and more. Thank you so much for joining today. Good evening and welcome. I'm going to call this, do you know that a talk like this in millennial speak, it's called Zumba. What's Zumba? Zumba is basically a Zoom meeting that's going to be, full of power-packed potential and benefits. And I think all of you would agree that this is definitely one. That's why you've signed up and you're spending this time here. I just want to take you through some quick house rules before we start. You need to observe. Please mute your microphones because we don't want to pick up some random sound effects from your background. I don't think you want us to pick them up either. So please mute your microphones if you're not the speaker. Also, we'll be having a Q&A session in the end. So listen to the talks, and if any point you have any questions, or if you've come to this event with a set of questions which you expect us to address, on the side of the chat, please, in the chat room, just direct your questions to KeyNote in the comment section. Binu, our amazing moderator, who actually pulled this entire event together, is behind the scenes. She's here to make sure that the questions reach the right panel speaker. And you're probably wondering, who's this woman who is giving us all these rules and bossing us around? Hello, I'm Uma Rachia, your host and moderator. I'm part of the KeyNote Women's Directory, and I'm the founder of the Female Idea. It is a movement that promotes equality of male and female ideas and creative leadership. I run a creative agency as well within a larger multinational PR agency, which you may be familiar with, Weber Shandwick. So yay, a lot more people have come in. So let's get started. Most of us are familiar with the COVID-19 symptoms: flu, fever, cough, stuffiness, breathing problems. But these aren't the only symptoms of COVID-19. With families, husbands, wives, kids, even extended families, some of us are living without in-laws, all under the same roof, under quarantine, working, studying, not being able to get out. We saw another key symptom of the pandemic, and this has been happening globally: something dark and physically and emotionally petrifying. The rise in domestic violence, the shadow pandemic. And that, ladies and gentlemen, the title of today's event, the shadow pandemic.
So sorry, Binu. Uma, I think there is a lot of background noise. Binu, would you be able to mute everybody instead as the host?
I have muted everyone except yourself, Uma and Georgia. Let me have a look.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. If you're not on mute and Binu's missed you by any chance, can you please put yourselves on mute? Yes, thank you, everybody. I think we've got a bit more silence now. So this event is brought to you by KeyNote Women Speakers in association with United Women Singapore and Aware. So KeyNote is the world's leading directory of female public speakers, and I'm proud to be part of KeyNote. Founded in Singapore in 2017, KeyNote is a non-profit organization and is run entirely by volunteers. And we aim to bring more diversity to the stages of the world. We offer women speakers who can talk about different topics ranging from business to diversity, equity and inclusion, innovation, health and wellness, leadership, science, and more. KeyNote also offers a member-based public speaking training program. So if any of you are interested to increase your confidence in speaking either at home or at work, do sign up. Before we carry on, I just have to give you a trigger warning. We are going to delve deep into topics around family violence, domestic violence. This can be quite intense. And so if you feel triggered or uncomfortable at any point, you can drop a note to the email on the side that Binu's going to type on the chat, and you can get the help you need. Binu, are you going to be typing an email at the side that people can, or should we flash something on screen right now?
We can do it at the end of the session.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will be sharing it with you at the end of the section. Okay, let's dive in. to our amazing speakers lined up. Today, we have some highly influential and inspiring women speakers who aren't just here to talk the talk. A lot, each of them have walked the walk and have on their own capacity or as part of a bigger organization done their bit to help victims of domestic violence. And today, the speakers we have are Georgette Tan from United Women Singapore. Georgette, can you give us a wave? Karina Lim from AWARE. Karina? Karina and Georgette are experts in the field, working with victims and are doing their part to help in helping with the situation in curbing domestic violence and creating awareness around it so people know what steps to take. Natalie Jean Song, who is also a keynote speaker and an inspiring and empowered woman, is here with us. And she's going to share her story of how she overcame domestic violence. And we have Sharul Chana. She's a well-known comedian in this region. And she and her husband have been, they have been the faces of the faces of the domestic abuse campaign in speaking up against domestic violence. Yeah. So let's begin with the first session, shall we? With Georgette Tan from United Women Singapore. Georgette is a keen advocate and passionate supporter of women empowerment and gender equality. Her female-focused attention and energies are spent in both the commercial and non-profit sectors. And, I've had the pleasure of working with Georgette. So like Beyonce, she believes that women deserve the right to be seen, heard, and respected. So let's put our virtual hands together and welcome Georgette. Over to you, Georgette.
Thank you, Uma. And thank you for that great introduction. I'm not sure I deserve it, but thank you. And thank you to Binu also for organizing this session, this webinar on what is clearly a topic that's of great gravity to everybody. And Uma, you're absolutely right. It could get difficult at points. I've been asked to start the session off this evening, and I want to say a very good evening to everybody. I think we've got mostly women, but did I spot a couple of gentlemen who are also logged on? Bravo, you are the enlightened ones who understand and who will clearly clear the path for women around you. So I'm going to start the session by providing you some context. United Women Singapore did a research exercise late last year that looked specifically at the perceptions of Singaporeans around domestic violence or family violence. And I'm here to share those findings with you in case you haven't come across them. But I think the idea here is to help frame the discussion that we will be having a little later on. So following this. So Binu, if you could show the slides very quickly, please. And I'll be moving along quite quickly. I can make these slides available to anybody who would like them later. Please ask Binu and we can get them to you. So this was conducted by United Women Singapore together with our partner Ipsos. It was focused in Singapore. Next slide, please. It was a small scale poll, very quick. 300 Singaporeans, and it was really conducted to try to understand the perceptions of domestic abuse. So we had a 50-50 split male-female, a cross-section around age, ethnicity, household income, all this again reflecting the demographics of Singapore. So the first thing that we found, if you can move to 2 slides, what we found, one more. The first thing that we found, 3 in 10 Singaporeans claim that they or someone that they are close to has encountered domestic abuse. So that's 30%, 3 out of 10, right? That we were surprised at that number. 10% actually said that they experienced it themselves, right? And of that 10%, 7% of the total number of respondents, which was 300 in this case, were male. 13% of the total respondents said that claimed to have experienced it themselves were female. So there's almost twice the number of male. And of course, we look at the 23% number, and that this was the number that reflected people who knew of someone that they were close to, family or very close friends that they were close to, who personally encountered domestic abuse. Next, please. And here's okay. Next slide, please. We might have, yes, no, I think, yeah, we might have missed a slide. Yes, there, thank you. This is an important number. This number reflects 40% of Singaporeans, that's 2 out of 5, who are under the impression that domestic violence is not prevalent in Singapore. Right? That's a scary number, 2 out of 5. And I'm sure we'll be discussing this further along too. So if you can go on to the next slide, Binu. Let's define domestic abuse. Next, please. And if you take a look at this, so it's violent, threatening pattern of controlling behavior, encompasses the physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, economic control, social isolation, all these. All right, and I believe there's, if I'm not mistaken, there's the governmental definition also includes neglect too as part of this. So as you can see, it's not just physical abuse, though people generally think that physical abuse, leaving the scars, leaving marks, leaving scratches, all those define physical domestic abuse. But what goes deeper, stays a lot longer, are the emotional and psychological scars. So next slide, please. Singaporeans seem to actually have a fairly high level of awareness. Right? As you can see, 78% agree that physical intimacy against a spouse's will is considered domestic violence. And 84% actually agree that forcing spouses to engage in sexual intercourse against their will is considered domestic abuse. So these are actually pretty decent numbers, right? So there's a high level of awareness. So if you can go on to the next slide. So let's take a look at what are the perceptions around domestic abuse. Next, please. So let's isolate and talk about spouses first, right? With regard to spouses, 84% of respondents agree that hitting a spouse, leaving a physical mark, a wound, is considered abuse, right? 84%. That's okay. That still leaves a number that don't consider it domestic abuse. But let's look at hitting a spouse without leaving that physical mark. 75% consider hitting a spouse without leaving a physical mark as domestic abuse. So what's happening with that 25%? 25% don't consider it physical abuse, domestic violence, family violence. Next slide. 1 in 4, they do not consider hitting a spouse as domestic violence. That's 1 in 4, 1 too many. Next slide, please. Still with regards to spouses, all right? These percentages indicate that respondents do not consider these behaviors to be domestic violence, right? So things like threats, exerting control, particularly around financial freedom, shouting, yelling at them, right? Slamming doors, all these things. These numbers are of respondents who do not consider these as domestic abuse. These are pretty high numbers. Next slide. Let's take a look at some more numbers. You know, if I can have the next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Controlling access to healthcare, even more important given the current environment of COVID, right? Causing a spouse to have low self-esteem, expressing uncontrollable, abnormal high levels of anger, and last of all, causing the spouse to feel fearful, intimidated, cowering, right? That these were the numbers of respondents who do not consider these behaviors to be domestic abuse. These numbers should be 0. Next, please. So we also looked at, beyond the spouse or intimate partners, we also looked at the elderly to see, again, in the broader framework of domestic abuse. So the numbers, as you can see on the right, 56, 54%, all these are not considered behavior that reflect domestic abuse against the elderly. Shouting, yelling, throwing things at them, right? Restraining, holding them against their will, verbally threatening them, all the way to, of course, hitting them and leaving a physical wound. This is how we treat our elderly. Next slide, please. We looked at children. Now, this is even more frightening. Things like shouting, yelling at them, 68% don't consider that to be domestic abuse. Throwing things at a child, but without hitting them, almost 60% don't consider that abuse, all right? Verbally threatening them, all the way down again to hitting them and leaving a physical wound. So to children, clearly, it's okay to be doing these things, at least in the eyes of the Singaporeans that we polled. Okay, and the next slide, please. Foreign domestic workers, right? Same questions, same numbers are very similar to the numbers that we saw for elderly, all right? And what was considered to be behavior against elderly to be domestic abuse. All the way down to hitting them and leaving a physical wound, 19%. But shouting and yelling at them, that clearly, that seems to be dominant. 60% don't consider that to be domestic abuse. It really isn't a wonder that we see and hear of so many instances of abuse of foreign domestic workers in the media, almost on a weekly basis. So how does society respond? Next slide, please. And following that. So interestingly, 86% of Singaporeans recognize that domestic abuse doesn't only impact the spouse, but also has a detrimental impact on children. So 86 recognize that. Again, this goes back to the earlier slides about high levels of awareness. All right, next slide. The poll revealed that a large percentage of Singaporeans recognize the need to be knowledgeable. 84%, that was 86%, but at 84% believe that there's need to talk more about it in order to be able to counteract and deal with the issues around domestic abuse in Singapore. Next. Dino? Yeah, thank you. And 82% feel it's their responsibility to act if they encounter an instance of domestic violence. In other words, not be a passive bystander, or worse still, turn a blind eye. So that's a pretty high number of people who feel that they take responsibility and it's on them to do something. Right? Next slide. The issue, however, boils down to what action to take. And this is where that number drops, because only 53% are confident that they know where to seek help from. So I think really, and again, this is just a snapshot of the numbers, the poll that we took to provide an idea of perceptions or misperceptions in this case of Singaporeans around domestic violence, family violence. Clearly, a lot more needs to be done to change perceptions, to build awareness, to change behaviors. So whether it's for the victims or survivors, as we call them, the perpetrators themselves, their families, their children, the community and the families, there's a lot more work that needs to be done in this space. And events such as this, prepared to talk about it in an open, frank manner, certainly help move that needle along. So thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to present that to you. I'm going to hand off to a dear friend of mine, obviously in the same industry, someone who I admire greatly. Karina Lim is Executive Director of AWARE. She's known as AWARE's spokesperson, the face of AWARE. She is a lawyer by training and who started her social justice journey 30 years ago. It's hard to imagine looking at Karina though, 30 years, no. And she did so by providing a great deal of pro bono legal counseling to women who were facing marital issues. And this actually included domestic violence. She has contributed in many respects at a national level on the reform of laws and practices relating to family, domestic violence, and sexual violence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hand off to Karina.
Thank you, Georgette. Can you hear me? I hope I am unmuted. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be on this panel with fellow activists and keynote speakers. And it's also great to see so many familiar names in the audience. It's not often that we get such a comprehensive range of speakers in one space on this topic. So I'm hoping that the audience will ask us some great questions and we can have a good discussion. As Georgette said, domestic violence is a topic that is close to my heart. I started my activism journey close to 30 years ago on this topic, actually providing legal advice to women who are experiencing all sorts of family issues, including domestic violence. I then joined a team of lawyers at AWARE to draft the Family Violence Bill, which my AWARE colleague, Dr. Kanwaljit Soin, presented to Parliament. And I talk about this history because it sort of has some parallels to some of the stats, amazing stats that Georgette showed us earlier. Dr. Soin was one of the first nominated MPs in Singapore. She's a bold and visionary woman and decided to present the Family Violence Bill in Parliament. And there was good reason to do so, as the law then was highly inadequate. Right? A domestic violence victim could only get police protection if they had broken bones, a ear, eye, or limb hanging out. The police were not authorized to arrest in less serious cases. So this is sort of same kind of pattern that we see, that you don't recognize violence unless it is pretty serious. I mean, it was worse 30 years ago, but even now, you still have many people who think that even hitting, threatening, throwing things at people is not domestic violence. This bill made history as it was one of the first ever private members' bills. The bill failed but succeeded in compelling the government to amend the Women's Charter, which strengthened the laws on domestic violence to what it is currently. And one thing to note about the Women's Charter, and I keep telling people this because The name is misleading and many people think, oh, it's only women that have protection. That is not the case at all. Although the act is called the Women's Charter, it should be more accurately called the Family Charter. It applies to men and women and really is the family law of Singapore, right? So fast forward to today. We are in COVID season. We have come out of phase 1 of our circuit breaker. I want to share Aware's experience on the Women's Helpline over the last 4 months. Aware runs the one and only Women's Helpline in Singapore. And this helpline is probably the easiest way for women to get help on family, workplace, and emotional issues. Because you're just a phone call away and you can be anonymous. You don't have to go to any place, right? So 9 to, I think it's 9 to 5 every day, Mondays to Fridays, you can call the Women's Helpline. About 25% of our calls deal with family violence and other domestic conflicts. Now, this is a virtual background, but the virtual background of the Aware office. And the room that you see behind me is really where the helpline and the counseling rooms are, right? So the helpline would probably just have about closed, but the helpliners are actually taking the calls from home these days. So to the people who call us, we also offer, aside from the helpline service, we offer counseling, legal clinics, and support groups to callers who need further services. So Singapore went into circuit breaker mode in April this year. And since then, right, the world, including Singapore and Aware's helpline, has seen a sharp increase in domestic violence cases. Bino, if you can help me with my slides and bring up the first slide, that would be great. I want to show you just how much increase we saw. Right? Oh, sorry, the second slide. Thank you. All right. So calls in April 2020 compared to April 2019 went up by 112%. In fact, this is an old number. We adjusted it and it is 119%. So April this year compared to April last year. And we recognize that these are only the cases that were able to reach out to us for help through the Women's Helpline, because many people were not able to safely reach out to us during this time when everyone had to be in a lockdown mode. In response to this, we launched a Vulnerable Women's Fund. We got some funds, we expanded the number of lines that we had. We also started a chat service where women could type to us. We book a time and they could then communicate with us, tell us what was happening. We would be able to support them through the chat, right? So sharp increase in calls and cries for help, and we increase our services. And there are more calls that we can't take actually, right? So this is not the universe of calls that came to us. There's also a national hotline which the government started just about the time of COVID. And that too has seen a lot of calls on domestic violence. Now we're moving out of circuit breaker. The calls are still high. We expect that it won't go down, may even increase because more people can actually get help, right? Or call for help. In May, the increase was 137%. So in May was even worse than in April. Now, you may be wondering what caused this increase. I think many of you can guess what some of these factors are. You can imagine, as you might have experienced this yourself or seen other people go through it, that there's greater stress caused by external factors. Maybe contracts were canceled, businesses could not operate, there was anxiety about job losses, people had to make all sorts of changes with their work processes, right? There's stresses caused by living and working in confined spaces, 24/7. with kids sharing the space and having to be homeschooled as well. But there are other factors aside from this, right, which have to do with the root causes of domestic violence. And Bino, if you can bring up the next slide, which is my favorite sort of graphic to explain what domestic violence is. Thank you. So this is what we call the wheel of power and control. And you can see that at the heart of this, it's about exerting power, one party exerting power and control over another party. This exertion of power can take many different forms, right? You heard Georgette talk about this. It can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, where you belittle someone and constantly belittle them so that they feel like nothing, right? At some point. It could be threats, intimidation, it could be financial control, control about healthcare, right? So all these are just forms in which power and control is exerted. So during this time, when people feel that the world is spinning out of control, some people who have had a pattern of trying to control another person will resort to trying to control the things that they can control, which includes the other person, more, right? So there seems to be a need to have to exert this control by what we would call the person who uses violence, right? And then on the other hand, the person, what we call the survivor, who is experiencing domestic violence, has no place to go. An interesting perspective is that for many survivors, work was the safest place that they had to go to, right? The workplace was the safest place. And there is now no longer that. Also during this time, it was easier to control another person. So the means of controlling were now more accessible. The other person couldn't go out. You could control also the technology that that person used. So we had many calls about this, about how people's handphones were taken away, smashed, passwords controlled, etc. Right? So, you know, these are some of the reasons why domestic violence has increased, right? The means of controlling, the need to control, the greater stress levels, the inability to access help, your own, you know, what could have been your networks where you could escape to, your workplace, they are reduced, right? And who are the people who experience domestic violence during this time? Now, we don't get calls from men because it's the women's helpline, and there's certainly many men who do experience this, right? Because and there will be a question later on this about men and domestic violence, but certainly there are men. But the people who called us included partners and spouses, siblings, adult children, daughters-in-laws, parents-in-laws, LGBT folk were really experiencing a situation that you call hostile homes, where they usually live with their parents, younger folk, and during this time they couldn't actually have that access to their friends, and they're not out to their parents, or maybe they're out, but certainly not accepted, right? Their sexuality is not accepted, and so they were also having a very difficult time. And I think the last thing I want to say is really about help-seeking behavior, right? And if we are to understand what we as a community can do, we need to understand why people don't seek help. The next slide, please, Bino. Thank you. So the first thing is that people think it's a private matter. Now, if we don't talk about it, right? If we don't, one of the silver linings about this is that many people are interested now. This is a little bit like the Me Too movement in sexual violence. Suddenly, everyone is interested. This is I think it's my 8th talk since COVID started on domestic violence, when for years we haven't actually been doing many of these talks because we've actually been focusing on sexual violence, right? But there is such an interest in this area, and we need to talk about it, right? And we need to recognize what the signs are. And I think the stats that Georgette showed are very instructive as to how people's conception of domestic violence is actually pretty narrow, and so we need to be able to broaden that. Fear of the other party is something else that stops someone from actually talking or sharing or seeking help. And self-sufficiency and fear of judgment kind of come together. So people ask me, do educated people experience domestic violence as much as less educated people? And the answer is, we don't know exactly what the percentage is, but certainly many educated people, very professional people, higher income people do experience domestic violence. However, they are less likely to actually talk about it because of the fear of judgment, and also, and not just their own, not the judgment of other people, but they themselves do not see themselves as victims. And if you now term a situation as domestic violence, they feel that, they have to recognize or identify as a victim. So often when we speak to people, we may not say domestic violence, we might say toxic relationship, right? So that people actually understand.
Okay, not too late.
Okay. Self-sufficiency, again, same thing, right? Some people just don't recognize. They're like, I am a successful professional. I can manage all aspects of my life. And they feel like they can take care of this part of it as well, right? So they may not reach out for help. Many people, and when I've going back to my legal counseling days, many people who knew that their situation was a terrible one and that they needed help would not leave the marriage because of their children, right? I think many parents, almost all parents, will want the best for their kids, and to weigh, I leave, and what kind of future will the kids have since the other person is supporting us? Where will we live? All of these questions will be very important ones. So what happened during COVID is not an overnight thing. It's not that it suddenly happened. There's usually a pattern of domination, of exertion of control, but it's exacerbated, right? And then it just sort of becomes, in some cases, very, very dangerous. So I think, we can stop here for a while. And the other silver lining that I want to talk about when we have the group discussion is about some innovative solutions that we are seeing, some things that Aware wants to actually start, which you all.
We, at this time, move on to the person we have lined up next, Cheryl Chana. We will get back to Karina later on the types of innovative solutions that she has to help women with abuse. Once we've gone through our lineup of speakers, we've got her back. Karina, welcome back.
I'm not sure what happened. I got kicked out.
Okay, you were just...
Please continue introducing Cheryl.
Yeah, I was just going to Cheryl, but I was thinking, because you let us off on something really important. You said you've got Wes coming up with some really innovative solutions. So I was thinking, do you want to very quickly take us through that? And then we can jump to Cheryl. Are you good with that?
Okay, you don't want the suspense? Oh, okay. All right.
You gave us 2 minutes of suspense, Karina.
Okay, so during COVID, we're all working from home. So what does it mean when the line between the workplace and home is erased? What does it mean for domestic violence? It means that workplaces should care about this, right? Because whatever affects someone at home, when they're working at home, is going to continue to affect them when they are actually trying to work, but from home. So the productivity of a person who is trying to survive, right? Survive in survival mode, trying to make sure that they're safe and their children are safe, is going to be highly, very much affected. So the innovative solution is that we are now speaking to companies to actually have workplace policies that recognize domestic violence as a workplace issue, right? As an issue that they can have benefits around. And some workplaces that we are collaborating with have started to do this. So the benefits could be emergency leave. It could be even emergency accommodation. It could be helping one to do a safety plan, right? And it's definitely, we train our colleagues to recognize what are the signs when another colleague is going through experiencing domestic violence. So we're getting the workplaces involved, and workplaces are seeing that they have a really good reason to be involved and are very well placed to do this. A survey has showed that close to 50% of people speak to their colleagues about this. So colleagues are natural first responders, except that they sometimes, if they're not trained, give the wrong first response, which would be disastrous. So we want to make sure that if someone speaks to you about their situation, you give the best possible response, right? So yes, this is the innovative solution, which the world has actually started 10 years ago, but now it's really coming in. It's very new in Singapore, but we think that this has legs. So we want to build a movement. We think that we would have succeeded to start something, right, that becomes a norm if we can get at least 15 companies on board, right? Training plus policies. I hope that innovative solution lived up to its expectations.
It did. I think it was really, really awesome. Okay. And now we have with us, we have an amazing comedian. A lot of you are familiar with her. I'm going to just hand it straight over to Cheryl to maybe just do a quick intro on herself and then, land what you have to land. Cheryl, go for it.
So hi guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Georgette and Karina and Uma and Binu for doing this. So when I was first asked to do this, I was stumped, and not because of anything, is because I don't come from a background where I don't do any research, and I'm not part of an organization. Of course, now I am a member of AWARE. I still need to sign. I mean, I've already signed up, but I think I'll officially sign up very soon. But I work with them quite a bit now with the kind of projects like I did a project last year called Crazy Poor Sita, and this year I did Am I Old, based on their reports. So when they asked me to be part of this panel, my first reaction was, honestly, what can I bring to the table in terms of my experience that the ladies and the organizations that have been doing great work would not provide? What can I bring? And then Binu said, no, I'm sure you have a perspective on this, and I actually do. And the first thing, and I think I'm going to make a couple of harsh statements here, because I know I'm not representing anybody. I'm not representing any organization. I'm proudly part of, I feel very much part of AWARE, but I'm not representing anybody when I say this. I feel that as a Singaporean woman, I do not feel safe in a country like Singapore. As a woman, I do not feel safe. And when I say this, what I mean to say is I've been reading a lot of articles, and I know this doesn't come under domestic violence or family violence, but what I mean is I come from an Indian background. So being smacked by my parents was a very normal thing to happen. And I know that a lot of people who come from an Asian background, we feel that if I get one slap, I will listen. Right? It's a very normal thing to be smacked or slapped, or, the hot spoon, or, the hanger flying across the room. And, nowadays, yes, it is considered as abuse. Now, I've always, first of all, struggled with that thing, right? At what time does this become domestic abuse? But I've been reading news articles, and it's I have been very upset because, there was a recent news or a case about a doctor who digitally penetrated a patient, and nothing happened with it. And when nothing happened, not even his license was revoked. I was very hurt. I was very upset. And I swear and it happens because it makes me so upset. I remember sitting in my room and crying that day and calling someone from an organization going, what is being done about that? And they said, Charles, we tried. Nothing, right? We can't do anything as much as it's a higher court. Never mind. Recently, 2 days back, there was a news about a student from NUS, and I don't know what it is with the NUS boys. I'm sure not all of them, but I think there needs to be a course when they enter NUS. There needs to be any educational institute. There needs to be a course where it educates men, women, people about how they should behave with their fellow students, how they should behave with the opposite gender. I think that is lacking in Singapore because they're so awkward with the opposite gender. I don't know what's going on. So there was a student, NUS student, who recently, he climbed into his girlfriend's house and he tried to strangle her. And he had 12 days of detention, something like that. And that's it, with some other corrective order, community order. And I said, when I read that, and everybody, and that's what we do, right? As Singaporean women people, we just share the article and we go, I feel so angry about this. Because it's in court and we can do nothing about it. And I felt really angry, and I understand where my anger stems from, is because I belonged from an Indian community where you cannot leave your spouse if just based on emotional abuse. And I'll tell you how I knew this, because 2 years back, I directed a play called A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, where the character Nora leaves the house based on emotional abuse. When I did that in Hindi, because I translated that, a lot of women walked up to me after the play and said, why did Nora leave her husband? He did not hit her. And I discovered what the problem was, that in the Indian community, or I'm sure it's not only in the Indian community, unless a spouse raises his hand or her hand on you, it's not considered abuse. And that rang a bell. And it went as deep as, for me, because 1.5 years back, I had a guy friend of mine. Of course, he's not living with me, so it's not domestic abuse, but he was a good friend of mine. He had come over for drinks. And when we left the house, I was going out to drop him. I was walking in front of him. There were 2 people behind me, a woman and a man. I felt someone smacking my bum. And it was a very hard smack. So I waited because I was intoxicated. He was not. She was slightly intoxicated. So I wanted to know who did it. When they both went back, I messaged both, because equality, right? I'm a feminist. I believe in equality. So I messaged both of them and I said, who hit my bum? Both of them said, we didn't do it. And there was a CCTV camera there. So I got the footage and I realized that my guy friend had hit me with his leg. So he kicked me. And my first instinct was, I was so upset. So I sat him down and asked him why he did it. And he said, oh, I don't remember. He gaslit me earlier. And I felt so much of guilt. I wanted to report him, but I did not report him. And this morning, when I was talking to Natalie, whom of course is going to come up next, and she was telling me about her experience of leaving a household where she was experiencing domestic abuse. And she left. I felt almost like, this was a guy friend. I felt so much guilt about reporting about a guy who was my friend for 4 years. And it takes so much strength for Asian women, or women in general, to leave their household, or men even, when we keep thinking of things, of recollecting of things that this person has done for us. And that's why we don't leave. And then we look at our judiciary system and we say, why wasn't this person punished and this person punished appropriately? So I think as a layman, laywoman, I feel that in many ways, and in a very harsh statement, I would say, in many ways, the judiciary system in Singapore has failed me. And we do not have equality in Singapore at all. We might be a developed nation, but I think for women, this is not a safe country. That's all I want to say. And next up, I'd like to introduce someone who has a lot more. I think that everybody should listen to her and her story. It was very inspiring talking to her yesterday, and even the time we spoke before. Natalie is a psychology counselor who recently co-founded the Singapore-based Song and Peshli, a non-profit organization offering counseling support to victims of domestic abuse and bullying. She recognizes that no one is born a bully and that we have to try to help the bullies as well. Co-authoring a dual biography, breaking out into the KeyNote speaking scene. Please put your hands together, a virtual hand a clap for Natalie. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you. Wow, I mean, you know, this has been such a journey for me, and I actually just want to thank Georgette, Uma, Karina, Sharul, and Binu for inviting me onto this panel to speak and share my experiences. This whole thing that, you know, about domestic violence and all, it's a very broad topic, right? Violence is, you know, it can be from home, it can be from the workplace, it can be from school. And already a few of us have talked about school, right? Everybody should have like a course before we go into school, and that's brilliant. You know, Karina, you were saying about the workplace, you know, about you know, allowing people to get together and help one another. I think, you know, as you guys also mentioned that, you know, so many years ago that wasn't possible, and to look at it now from where we're standing, it's been growing, and yes, the topic is such a hot topic now. I'd like to share my experience, and I know, you know, the statistics is shown. Many of us have seen, you know, experienced or know someone who has been domestically abused, violently, you know, hurt, emotionally, you know, abused as well. And for me, to be honest, and for me to share my experience, I'm scared. It took me a lot of courage to do this, and sharing my story is not going to be an easy one because, you know, as Karina kind of showed on the screen just now, the 6 points that you know, a person would feel before even wanting to share. So for example, it's a private matter, right? In the Asian context, we're very conservative, we're very close, you know, and scared of fear of judgment, right? And to be honest, like, what would people think of me right now after I share my story? Self-sufficient, you know, like before I left the home, would I be able to support myself and my children? You know, I have 3 children. And for the fact that it says normal for one of the points, a lot of people who experience abuse will feel that it is their fault. And it will become a norm in their life. And of course, saving the family, and it's a lot of guilt trip from the partner, right? Partner, I would say, because it's not just the woman, but men as well get abused. So the partner would guilt trip a lot of times that, you know, you are going to mess up the family, you are going to break up the family, the kids are not going to have a happy life because you leave. And with this, I leave with you first, and I'm going to allow you to come into my world for a bit. So for me, domestic violence started out at 20 years old. The relationship started normal, right? Like a normal relationship, how it would. The first time he expressed violence, it was a shout in public across the hall at my workplace. It was because he waited a little bit too long for me in the car park while I was packing up for work. And that escalated to blame, right? But at the same time, there was a lot of indoctrination of grooming. You know, no one will ever love you as much as I do. And shortly after that, there were slaps and pushing against the wall when he's angry, or hitting me on the head with his knuckle. All that kind of came through shortly and in such a short time, but experiencing it felt like it was over months. Shortly after I was married, it kind of dawned on me, and I was thinking, you know, I was afraid to tell the police because, you know, what if he gets into trouble? If he gets into trouble and when the police is done with him, he'll come after me. And I have many death threats that was posed against me. Like, if I ever left him, he would kill me. If I had another person that I knew or had a friend, he would kill me. And that just kind of shook me with fear. The first time I was pulled out of the house was was also a very an experience I'll never forget. Let's put it that way. And my cousin contacted me overseas, and at that point of time, I was very isolated. I wasn't allowed to contact my family or friends. I had no support. And she contacted me from overseas, and soon she kind of built the rapport with me. And every time she called, he had to be there. She came over for a holiday, and she wanted to meet me up, and obviously it was a no-no. But my father and her came over and literally dragged me out of the house when he wasn't around. I was shaking with fear because I was just afraid that if his car were to just drive by, I would be in so much trouble. You know, the abusers were, just to name a few, were like heavy objects thrown against me, like with a motorcycle helmet or hard plastic bottles. I had him hitting me with a belt, kind of tying me up with duct tape, my hands and feet and my mouth, just leaving me there for hours in the dark, throwing me and locking me in cupboards, rape, stripping and walking out of the house. He also belittled me and humiliated me in public. So, yeah, it's been such a journey, and over these 10 years, after the children were born, the hitting decreased, but the emotional and the verbal abuse was still there. I tried to divorce him 3 times, and the 4th time was successful. And that includes 3 PPOs as well. PPOs is personal protection orders. And until now, the last protection order is still standing. The day that I walked out of my family in front of my 3 boys was because my 3 boys were to a point where they hit me if they didn't get what they want. And it struck me, and because the action itself, not so much of the hitting, it didn't hurt, but the action itself allowed me to understand that they're taking over their father. And it's what I do right now to be able to make a stand and allow them to know that that's wrong, or I'm just going to sit and be quiet. And that's what they're going to think for how to treat a woman. The night before, he and I had a very bad argument. And I went over to my mom's place. The next day was a work day, and I came back in the morning to collect my stuff for work. He questioned me, and I didn't want to answer because it was in front of the children. He couldn't take it, and he was impatient, and he raised his hand on me. And at that point of time, I had enough, and I just raised my voice, and I just stopped him. This whole scene, if you can picture it, it was in front of my 3 young boys at that time, until 2018. At that point of time, it just really struck me like, what are you going to do next? Are you going to leave now or stay here and just be quiet? And I walked out. And as hard as it is to walk out of your children's life, and it's a very big lesson for them, because that's not a way to treat a woman. No, it is for a partner to treat another. And I did, and the process took, it was a very long process. He didn't allow me to see my children for and then the divorce only ended in January 2020. So right now, I just co-founded a nonprofit organization, and that it's a calling for me, and I taking on this role as a counselor really allow me to feel for another person and kind of move through the journey with them, because personally it's so close to my heart, you know. And yeah, so it's been I wouldn't say great, but meaningful and definitely lesson learning. So thank you all for your time, and I will pass it on back to Uma.
Thank you, Natalie. Wow. You know, just hearing you speak, you, Cheryl, Karina, Georgette, I think I went through a whole barrage of emotions, like in such, it was so intense. I felt angry, I felt irritated, I felt hopeful, I felt I want to be empowered so that I can take action and do something about it. I wish, Natalie, when you were sharing your stories, I could just sweep into your situation and help you. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how um, you know, the irony is a lot of times you don't leave because of your children, and yet the thing that empowers you to leave is because of it's your children as well. You don't want them to think this is okay and deal with it when it's their turn, right? That was amazing. I think that whole paradox of insights. I was like, oh my God, okay, do not cry, do not cry. Uh, and I think a lot of you would agree that they didn't just paint the situation as dire, because these are strong women. I mean, they've given us how to's, innovative ideas. Natalie stepped out of a situation, right? It gives you hope. There's tangible steps that you can take. You can call the Aware Hotline. There are things that are being done with your workplace to help the people in those kind of situations. Now, there is something I need to tell you guys. We've gone way over time, but we're thinking, because we're going to get into the meat of the whole thing now, and we're going to delve deep on the topics that have been discussed. If you could just spare an additional 20 minutes, that's a lot of benefits. We can understand if you really need to run off and you've, you know, made appointments. And I think Venus is going to be sharing the recordings with everybody so you can catch up later. But there's nothing like seeing the energy and being here live, right? So please be with us. Continue this journey with us, okay? So now we're going to be spending the next 25 minutes engaging these incredible women and diving deep into some of the things they've spoken about. And I know there are questions that you have in mind. A lot of people have started asking questions, and thank you so much. You know, keep the feedback coming. It's very, very encouraging. And after that, I'm going to be opening up the Q&A session to all of you for 15 minutes. So some of the questions that are already here, we're going to take them. And Binu, our awesome moderator, is at hand. She's going to get the right questions and pass to me to direct to the right speakers. Before we carry on, I said this earlier, and now Binu, you've got the email up, right? Can you please share that? We are going to be discussing topics that delve deep into family violence. We already have. It can be quite intense. Some of you may feel triggered. You may feel uncomfortable. At any point, if you want to drop a note to this email address, get the help you need, please. Don't take it away. Don't take away this feeling. And yeah, so here, you know, there's a hotline number for you to call. I'm just going to give you this. There's an email as well, www.pave.org.sg. The hotline number to call 1-800-202-6868. So just take a quick screen grab of this if you want to. Okay, thank you, Binu. Now, you know, continuing on where Natalie and Cheryl left us, right? Cheryl, you're a comedian, and even as we were preparing for today, you talked about how when you go on stage with some of your male peers who are also comedians, right? There are jokes that are being said about this issue. You mentioned it as well on stage, that dismisses domestic abuse altogether.
Yeah.
And you said even for yourself on a topic like this, you tread carefully because, like me, and like many of us today, right? You aren't sure what to say, what to ask, what's okay to ask, where are you crossing the line? And I remember Karina also mentioning this. She said a lot of times people don't ask for help because the moment you ask for help, you're admitting you're a victim. So it's also the language around that and how you're saying it. So it's a big sensitive issue. So I've spoken to Natalie, and Natalie has kindly said that you can ask us some of those questions that you have in your mind.
Sure.
So what are some of those questions that you wish, some of those myths that you wish were busted, or some of those questions around this that you might want to ask but you don't know how to?
Yeah.
Over to you, Cheryl. You can ask Natalie. Natalie, let the education begin.
So Natalie, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this morning and even sharing now. It's very enlightening. It's, I feel a lot of strength listening to you. I want to know, I know you said it was, you left after 10 years. I want you to, if you could just tell me, what are the feelings you had? What made you stop from leaving? That's my first question. And if you can lead that into, what kind of person would you have around you who would have helped you leave? I mean, I know that family checks on you, and I'm sure at times you were like, no, I'm fine. But, what made you leave, and what kind of person can I be if I have a neighbor who's going through this? What kind of comforting words, or what kind of, words that can help you say, yes, I want to come with you. If I want to be a person who wants to help, what can I do?
Thank you for the question. So your question is, what made me leave, right? Okay, so a few things. I think enough is enough. That's one. But more importantly, because the fact that my children are already, it's already in their belief system. And a lot of times, children, when they grow up, see they're like sponges before 6, right? Mm-hmm. They just absorb everything. They learn so much. And the fact that they've already came up with, hitting me as their mom if they don't get what they want, it says a lot. Mm. Also because I didn't have my freedom. And my freedom meaning, in a relationship, it's not somebody who controls you. And like what Karina shares, so much of controlling, you feel very, just uncomfortable and just very stifled. And, you just want to break out of that. And you just feel like it's not yourself anymore. You actually lose yourself in many of people, I'm sure, always feel and have this thought of, I just lost myself. Mm. And who would I want to have around? Yep. So a lot of times people, when we show empathy, just being human, I understand that people have egos, people have pride, and sometimes the proudest person in the room might be the saddest person in the room. And they'll just put a facade on and just go like, I'm so happy right now. I've got my money, I've got my, car, my condo, my 5 C's, right? Nothing's gonna happen to me. And deep down, they're broken. We take the example of right now, the hottest news in the world is Johnny Depp and his ex-wife. They're rich, they're famous, they got everything they want, but they're not happy. And I think the most human thing to do is to show empathy to the person that you see struggling. A simple word as, are you okay? I see that, you're not being yourself these few days. Let's go out for a drink. Drink can be coffee, juice. And it's I think showing that genuine care to someone, it would really help the person to kind of even for the first step to open up, because a lot of times people are scared, right, to even share. What if that person judged me when I share? So a lot of times I think it's genuine care and empathy and concern.
And that came from your family first, or your neighbors or friends? Did people hear about it? I mean, if I were your neighbor, I mean, what would you expect me? Because sometimes what happens in Singapore, we are very passive aggressive human beings. We might hear something, we don't know when we should get involved. At what point, was it your family that stepped in first? Did you, if your neighbor would have stepped in, would you have reached out? If I'm your neighbor, at that point, what would you have expected of me? I mean, I only ask these questions because I'm sure that it's COVID-19, as Aware has said, as the research is telling us, it's domestic abuse is increasing. So if there's someone around you, what can we say to help? You know, what is the right thing to say? What would you want to hear?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're right about, you know, being not, well, passive aggressive, but at the same time, very kept to myself, right? And like we say, for example, a neighbor, let's take your example, you know, when we can see emotions on the face, you know, and most of our time when we want to transmit or when we want to tell somebody something, it's always on the face, the body language. And that, like, I know a lot of people here will understand that, you know, when we see somebody's body language, you know, the hunch, the sad face, the daze, the, you know, just out of it, you know, and you can tell when somebody is just not involved. You know, the first few words, I really, really strongly feel that just a simple question as, are you okay? Or even a simple hi. You know, when you make that connection, and connection, of course, take time. You know, I was a community manager, and how I connected with my clients was a simple hi. And that kind of would bring you to build that rapport initially, and then a friend relationship, you know, to then ask them the questions of, you know, how are you feeling today? You know, and then ask them questions about their feelings. You know, I see you, you know, staring in a daze. Are you feeling sad, or how are you feeling? You know, let them have an open-ended question for them to answer.
Sure. And did you reach out to your family, and how important is it to reach out to one's family when you are going through this? Because a lot of people stay in guilt, right? You're like, I don't know if I can reach out to my mom and tell me what's happening, right? So how, yeah.
You know, it's funny that you asked, because I was the rebellious one, and I was the one that didn't listen to my mom. And, you know, she of course wanted to help me so much, and I pushed it away, and I thank her and my family for being there and so supportive all this time. I mean, a person's life is so, like, a person can experience so much. A person can know their parents, but their parents don't want to know them, right? And it's dynamics like these that are very, very, basically one doesn't fit the whole bill. You know, I think family also doesn't only encompasses like blood related people. It can be people who are close to you as friends. And I think friends who you keep close are the most important, you know, who you trust, and the few of them. I think the person also would need to reach out to their friends to kind of talk, you know, and a lot of times when people are sad and down or depressed, they will show signs, and they will actually reach out to people, but it's either whether the person kind of takes it or not, or recognize it as calling help from their end. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in very quickly, Natalie. I'm curious, was people who watched you in that situation, because it was prolonged, it was for a very long period of time, and it just kept constantly happening, and there were definitely physical signs as well as, you know, your emotions were on your face, as you said. Did anyone step in and you know, speak to you or try to intervene at any point?
Yes, they did. My facial expressions could tell. And also another thing about my ex-partner was he knew how to hit, because he would hit that it would be painful, but it would not leave a bruise. So there were not physical signs of bruises. And you know, when they tried to reach out, I couldn't, because if they knew, I would get into trouble, you know. So the whole afraid to speak up, really. And
back to what Karina said as well about, you know, there's the fear that you would be endangering yourself if you accepted help or admitted that you needed help. It would sound like you were telling on your husband.
Yes.
For your ex-partner, yeah.
Correct. And it would be a guilt that I've put him into trouble, or in the person's case, I met her into trouble, because they have already groomed you and said that, you know, I would love you like no one else would, you know, and you say, oh, he loves me, you know, and I'll be getting him into trouble. And it's that guilt tripping, you know, that would cause you to stop. Yeah, and it's actually a very sad cycle of violence, you know, where the build up and then the outburst, and then a lot of it is the sayang part, right? And in Singapore we call sayang. To kind of love you, bring you out for dinner, gifts, you know, and then the whole cycle will start. And a lot of times, partners would crave that loving part or the attention that the partner would give again, and that what make them stick and kind of stuck in that situation, going deep down. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wow. The whole cycle of it being in your mind, you thinking, he loves me, I'm not going to break away from this because, you know, this is just temporary. On the long run, he loves me. But something must have triggered you to, what was it? You know, what was it that triggered the enough is enough?
Yeah, you know, and it's funny also that you asked that, because when I'm counseling my clients now, I ask them to write, when is your enough is enough, you know, and for me it was my children, you know, and I couldn't bear to see them growing up as abusers themselves.
Sir Natalie, can I ask you one question? And I know I'm sorry for jumping. I want to ask you, do you think that, do you think that the police or the judiciary system was helpful in this situation? Just wanted to leave it there so you can talk about it.
Just hope no police here. You know, I think we kind of addressed that just now about the police not being able to step in, and actually even now when you bring it up to the police, you are not able to get the police help or protection. And I personally find that should change, and that, you know, us as people, you know, although yes, you do not want to delve into something very messy, but a person's life is almost at stake, and you have no idea when a person is going to snap. You know, unfortunately, at the time when I made my first police report, and when they asked me, do you want to press charges? I said no. I was scared. I was scared that he would come after me, because this is all details behind closed doors. And you know, he would say, you shame me. He would say, you know, you have displayed everything. Now everybody knows about you. You are a whore. You are like a weakling, you know, and you just displayed for everybody to see. And that was actually the part where, when I made my report 10 years later, the police didn't go into that. The first ever police report I made was because it was so long ago. And to them, they will see that, you know, you're fine now. And I'm not sure if they dismissed it, but they said that they will call the perpetrator and ask him a few questions. And to be honest, whether they called him or not, I wasn't sure. Yeah, but he wasn't charged.
Wow, that's such a shame, you know, to have to go through all that for 10 years. And then they're thinking about, if it happened 10 years ago, maybe she's recovered from it. She's gotten over it. It might not be the situation anymore. And here you are going back and telling them you've got a problem, and it's lasted 10 years and nothing's being done about it. What a shame, right? And, you know.
So maybe I can just add that actually the law is not great on this. And it's a few reasons, right? Because the law looks at incidents, just like incidents, and, you know, it's really looking for physical incidents, right? But a lot of this is about a pattern of behavior that's gone on for a long time. So even in the Women's Charter, there are time limits, right? Between one incident and another, you cannot bring back, like, dig too far back, right? Because it doesn't really understand this thing about how it's actually a whole pattern, and it's not and I think Natalie's story is actually really classic in a way. It had so many, all the power side, the wheel of power, all the different ways of controlling someone is there. And it starts with violence, but actually in the later years, it may not be violence, but that fear is already implanted as one, right? And it takes a lot for someone to be physically violent at another person. That's why it's not everyday physical violence, because the neighbors might hear it takes a lot of physical exertion to try to control someone that way. So after a while, it becomes emotional violence, right? And then emotional abuse can be this planting an idea that no one's going to love you as much as I do, a dependence, right? Like, and then make you feel like also worthless. So all of these things, how do you capture this in the law? And that's why in the UK, they have something called coercive control, which we haven't got yet, but we're like, okay, is it time to now,
We're counting on you, Karina.
Should we now enhance our domestic violence provisions? It has been the way it is since 1995. Right, so it's maybe time for a revamp and maybe taking some of Georgette's statistics.
Definitely. So,
Natalie, can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Tell us what you felt when you actually walked out. Was it relief? Was it more fear? Was it just numbness? What is it that you actually, do you remember that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was such a mix of emotions, really, to be honest. So it's interesting that you said numb. Towards the end of the few years, at the end of the relationship, I basically wanted to cut my feelings just for that person, right? And unfortunately, it trickled over to the love for my sons. And I actually knew that and realized that finally when I said I love you to my boys, my children, and I didn't feel a thing. I was just like, okay, I love you, but I don't feel a thing. And it's just, and that's kind of where I knew that I numbed out. When I walked out of that house, it was such a mix of emotions because it was courage, it was fear, it was sadness, it was guilt, because, and there were so many things. Courage because you are going to do something that teach your boys, and I know it's harsh, it's tough love, but it's gonna be a lesson that stick with them through the rest of their life. Fear because he'll come after me after that, and he already had death threats planted. There was actually a quick one in terms of threats. We drove home one night from the club, and there was a dark alley, and we were fighting. I forgot about what. He drove me into an area where it's just woods and it's pitched up. When you turn off the car light, and he said, "I'll bury you. I'll kill you and bury you here, and no one will ever find you." Because I was ready. I didn't care where I was. I was just ready to get out and run. And he stopped me. He stopped me and he held me, and I wasn't able to go. It was a very psychological thing. He wants to do something, but at the same time, he's worried that I'm gone. So back to the question in terms of my emotions when I was walking out. So fear, and then after the whole thing about guilt, because my boys, will they hate me in the process, and then finally understanding what that mommy did all those years ago, breaking up the family, not being able to have them have a unit, right? So yeah, all these thoughts were going through my mind, but at the same time, and I don't want to sound cliche, but I already had this thought in my mind even before going through counseling psychology course, that I needed to help people, for women and people who are going through this abusive thing, and that no one should. So that was propelling me, and I had a very good support from my family and my friends, and it's that connection with people, is that connection that, you know, we got your back, is that connection that, okay, if I'm coming out of this, I know I'm going to be okay, you know.
I think it's important for us to provide, you know, people in this situation that connection, as you rightly put it earlier. Natalie, you talked about, you know, just being there, irrespective of whether the person's prideful or you know, seems to be putting up a tough exterior. It's showing empathy and genuine care, right? We're going to break it up a little bit now, and we're going to have a poll where every one of you who's, you know, our dear participants, we want you to participate. Binu, if you could put up the question, please. So because of time, we want to do this quite quickly. We'll just wait for Binu to put up the question. Okay, can you all see the poll? So you've got 20 seconds to do this. So your best friend tells you that she has been abused by her husband for the last 10 years. How should you respond? Okay. Awesome. So we've got the results. They're happening in real time. I'm so sorry to hear this. Are you okay? 88% of you said, I'm so sorry to hear this. Are you okay? I'm going to get the next question to you, Karina, because you know, you're constantly getting all these calls from women and you're dealing with this. Do you think this is the right response? Do you also work with people whom you counsel on how to respond to this? You train people to respond to this, right?
Yes. So we run the helpline. So yes, we're constantly, every year we're training. Our helpline training is actually going on this year despite COVID, and we'll be starting in September, October. So you can sign up to be a helpliner. It's a very intense course. It's usually 2.5 months, twice a week. I think it's 5 hours a week all in, right? So yes, being able to respond to questions like this is an important part of it. So the correct answer was the last one, which was, I'm sorry to hear that you're going through this. Are you okay and are you safe, right? As Natalie said, you know, the are you okay question is a very powerful one, where you are just inviting the other person to, you know, you're showing concern, but you're not pressurizing the other person. The other person, you know, has got many reasons holding them back. We have a whole lot of reasons, right? Fear, guilt, shame, hope, you know, love, not wanting to break up the family. There's so many reasons. So at any one point may not be the right point of time for them to confide in you. So the are you okay is actually a really good thing. The are you safe is really our main, would be our main priority, to make sure that that person is safe physically and psychologically, right? So if you can get beyond, I mean, you know, neighbor situation, you're in a lift, you might not be able to ask the are you safe question. But if someone tells you a little bit more about what's happening at home, you can go to the next one to say, are you safe? Right. So that's probably that's the best answer. Any other thing that is about that casts a judgment?
I've got a quick question. You said in the event that you've asked them, are you safe? And they say, no, I'm not. What do you do?
Okay, it's a good question, right? So now, so as a helpliner, of course, we are trained with all the different options, and I can run you through them. But firstly,
what do I do if someone tells me? I've listened to you today. I've gone out and asked my neighbor, are you safe? And my neighbor says, I am not, and is looking at me with hope. What do I do?
Yeah. So, you know, at that point, it's unlikely to happen that way. But if they are, I think you should really pull them aside to have a chat about this situation, right? If they are able to, because now you need to find out more and to see how you can make sure that they are safe. So how do you make sure that someone is safe? You have to find out what's the situation at home. I mean, so a safety plan can be anywhere from, are you physically safe? Is there, are there threats? Are you fearful for your safety? Then if that's the case, is there a room in the house that you can lock yourself in if something should happen? So simple questions like this, right? So that now you'll find that many people already know what to do because they have been living with this and keeping themselves safe for some time. They already sort of know all these things, and that's why they're very focused on making sure that they and their kids are safe, right? But if they actually need to also, they might need to think about, if I need to run out of the house, where do I go, right? Do I have money? Do I have my keys, etc.? So that kind of safety planning, that's why it's not something that I can train you in 5 minutes. You can go through our course.
Yeah, but they can contact you.
You get the idea. Yes. That's 1-800-777-5555, right?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I was talking over you. Go for it.
1-800-777-5555 is the number. Okay. And if it's engaged, try again, right? You will get through, but you may not get through the first time. Yeah.
Okay. So we will give them the number. So that's basically the most empowering tool right now that I have, that I can hand over to somebody to call and get the help they need, right?
Yes.
Thank you. There's another question that I was dying to ask because I was getting very angry as well, when everyone was talking about the state of our law and how we don't have enough, right? And it's slowly changing, and I know that you are attempting to change it, but it sets a precedence, doesn't it? If you're constantly reading stuff like this in the newspaper or online that states, that the authorities are looking at this as at issues that are harming women, that are so detrimental and terrible, and giving it such low penalties, you think people won't think twice about doing it. It's okay. I mean, it's just a little bit of community service here, a little bit of fine here, no big deal, right? It's not like drug pushing and getting life sentence, but it also makes women like us feel that asking for help amounts to nothing. It sets a mindset precedence. It makes you think about these things, because when you want to ask for help, you always think about the consequences of getting help. And you're thinking, if it's worth the effort, I'll do it. But it feels like it's not worth the effort. How do we shift that? What help do we give? Sorry, Karina, I know this is a surprise question to you.
No. There are things you can do, right? So firstly, that's what AWARE is there for as well. We work with the authorities, and we will work on your case. And there are many cases where we have to work with the police. So on a case-by-case basis, I would say, really, especially when it's sexual violence, because I feel that's the area that is newer in Singapore, right? Domestic violence since 1995, we have had laws in place. There has been protocols put in place, but actually the new area is sexual violence, which is much more difficult. And for that, I would say please call AWARE, because we can walk you through, we can handhold you. It is very difficult. Yes, it's true, but a lot of people are motivated by the fact that if I don't speak up now, this person is going to continue doing it, right? And then they actually feel quite a responsibility, but they need some support. Now, if you feel angry, channel your anger and write letters, right?
My MP is getting a lot of letters from me, that's for sure.
In relation to every case, AWARE will speak up, but we haven't spoken out about this NUS case because we're trying to find out what the inside story is. We're told like the prosecution might have asked for a certain sentence. So before we comment, we actually need to know a little bit more. We also need to know, is there an appeal? Because if there's an appeal, we're not supposed to say anything. So there are quite a few things as an organization, that has a public statement.
I'm not the organization. I have to say something.
Shahrul Chana can always say anything and get away with it. So you go. Go.
And then when they charge me, I'll be like, Karina, can you please be my pro bono lawyer?
Since we've Okay, we're talking about solutions here, right? One of the things that was mentioned by Georgette really got me interested. Georgette, you said that 7% of people of men suffer from domestic violence. Did I get the numbers right? Seven. I wrote it down.
That is
7% of
correct. It's 7% claim that
7%.
they
Yes.
have personally experienced it. That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So we've got a poll now. Okay. We're gonna put up the poll. Binu, can we put up the poll, please? Okay. Is it similar in nature? People take a look at this. Men experience violence just as often as women do. Actually, we should have made this a trickier question.
No, it's a tricky question. You see, that's why you don't get you get
It's changing,
fairly
right?
well
It's
divided.
changing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
people, you
and a
have
lot of people are not sure. It's tricky enough.
yeah, that's good. That's okay, awesome. So we're gonna okay, we've got it. 46%, the majority are not sure. So Georgette, it'll be great if you could talk to us about not just, I mean, you gave us the numbers, but is it the same type of violence? And where does this violence come from? Is it from their spouse? Are women beating up their husbands or hurling abuse or controlling the money purse? Or, you know, or is it parents abusing young boys or teenagers? Is it people in the LGBTQ community that are getting abused, which Karina mentioned earlier?
So the numbers that I quoted earlier come from our research, and that's basically saying close to double the number of women indicate that they have personally experienced domestic violence vis-a-vis what the men are saying. So the answer is actually closer to false, because in effect, men don't experience violence as often. And that's actually substantiated by another statistic which we found, is the proportion of personal protection orders, the PPOs, which Natalie referred to earlier, over the years. And this has been consistent from 2010 all the way through to 2019, which is the last number. The male to female ratio is 1 to 3. So for every 1 PPO taken out by a male, 3 for women. So
I can explain why. Yeah.
Please go right ahead, jump in.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of true around the world. That's 1 to 3 around there. And the reason is, there are two reasons that I think make sense to people. One is that men often don't have the kind of dependency. So, okay, if they experience violence, it could be as a child, right? So your question, right? But in terms of spousal or intimate partner violence, it is less, because men often have got, it's easier for them to get out of a violent, abusive relationship. There's less financial dependence. The constraints of the children are not as strong, right? So that's why they might, but they often can get out that relationship more easily. Second reason is that if you think about our socialization, which gender is socialized to be powerful, in control, strong all the time? It is men. So that the dominant and the less dominant party is usually men that are trained, right, expected to actually be in charge. So that's why when you think about power and control, men have a lot more pressure to always be in power and in control. Right? So it makes sense that it is less.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, it is the cultural aspect here that has such a strong influence and play. And yes, it's perpetuated by, the generations upon generations. So Natalie, going back to you when you said, you had to step out of the relationship because your boys were starting to follow what their father was doing. and you didn't want them to go down that path. This whole this intergenerational cycle, you know, it perpetuates itself. And I came across it wasn't from our research, but I came across something recently that actually said that children who witness their fathers beating up on their mothers were actually about 10 times more likely to do that later on in life, right, to their own spouses and their own loved ones and their own intimate partners. So you were doing the absolute right thing, which was to take your boys out of that situation and take yourself out of the equation too, because it would have just perpetuated the situation. And there you go, you know, it would have been the boys that would have been perhaps, you know, beating up on their loved ones too.
Yeah, it's a very intergenerational, you know, generation to generation. They see it, they do it, and they think it's normal. That's the worst part.
Exactly right. They think it's normal. They think it's part of this whole, if I'm a man, if I am to assert myself as the household, the leader of the household, then this is what I do. This is normal. So we need to change that.
Yes, and a lot of times, you know, I think a lot of people here have heard this line, boys don't cry.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you don't cry because you're a boy. Big boys just don't cry. And those are one of actually the first few layers of belief systems that kind of sets that whole, you know, belief system as you grow up. And you know, as women, when we hear it, and then as for themselves when they hear it, you know, if a man were to experience abuse, they are almost shy to talk about it, or even shameful, because, you know, they will feel like, I'm not supposed to cry. I can't show emotion unless it's soccer game. But you know, it's the whole belief system that is turned up topsy-turvy, and I strongly feel that men should also come forward to be human. I mean, we're all human beings. We are entitled to show our feelings. You know, they should have a say as well.
That's amazing. That's powerful. I think a lot of behaviors culturally, or, you know, through upbringings and for generations, they have been normalized, but it does not make those behaviors okay. And I think, you know, when someone steps out of that situation that's normalized, to make a small shift, immediately it sets in motion, you know, the domino starts falling, and immediately it sets in motion a new set of behaviors that are right, that causes those bad, wrong behaviors that are normalized to right themselves, right? That's awesome. I mean, good on you, Natalie. I mean, you've been an encouragement to a lot of women out there, and men also, I hope. Don't feel ashamed to ask for help. It doesn't matter, you know, just because you're expected to culturally be the macho one. We all need help, and boys do cry. If they can cry at football, they can cry at things that matter.
Umar, I think it has to be made known that it actually takes a lot more guts, a lot more of the bravery, all right, to step out of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to take it on, and that's obviously really, really hard on the victim, the survivor in this case, as well as the immediate family. But it takes so much effort, so much. You have to reach so deep inside to pull it out, and to show that bravery. And we have to recognize that. So whether it is the woman or the man that does that, and you know, takes the first step, we have to recognize that it is such a huge move.
That's true. I think it is, especially when you've been groomed and you're thinking that this particular behavior is acceptable.
Correct.
Where do you stop and start thinking this is wrong, right? That's the hard bit, to be willing to do that. We're running out of time, so I'm looking at all the questions that people have sent. Thank you so much. We may not be able to answer all your questions, but as I mentioned earlier, we will take the questions and the different speakers will get back to you via email, right? So we're going to take the next 7 to 8 minutes to answer some of these questions.
Can I just give a plug to the event we're doing tomorrow on toxic masculinity? It's at 8 p.m., right? It's called Good Boys, Soft Boys, Semi Boys, Boys Will Be Boys, Learning and Unlearning Toxic Masculinity.
Thank you, Karina. Okay, so if you look on the right at the chat, right, of the screen, you'll see a whole bunch of, actually Georgette and Karina have been very good. They've been answering a lot of your questions as you've been asking. And Karina's also been plugging a lot of the events and a lot of the solutions and types of help that are available, you know, to some of the questions you've asked. So they're there. Now I'm going to jump to a question. Wow, I'm looking at the list of questions I have here. There's a question, Georgette, you had answered that on the chat. I saw this answer. Karina, you mentioned that one myth we hold about domestic violence is that, you know, people think low-income families are the ones where abuse happens. The more educated, high-income ones, no, there's no abuse happening. But you said that's not true, right? What are some of the other myths around domestic violence that we can bust?
I think a lot have been actually dealt with in this session. The one that hasn't come out yet is probably that alcohol is the reason for domestic violence, right? We've heard that quite a bit, and it is not the reason. I think the reason for domestic violence is really about parties trying to exert power and control over another. It's about control. The alcohol can exacerbate it, but if you don't have the root problem, which is a thinking that a person or one party is entitled to control another party, then the alcohol is not going to make a difference, right? It starts with that wrong thinking. So I think that's worth pointing out as a myth.
Yeah, there's another question on, thank you for clearing that up. Yeah, I think we've been programmed after watching all these movies to think that, you know, the father gets drunk, he comes home and he beats the wife and he beats up the kids. But that's really not the case, right? It's about, there's an underlying thing, power and control. We have another question from Nur Adam. What happens if the ex-partner comes to harass and cause psychological harm again? Natalie was quite afraid of that happening, and that was part of the reason why she didn't get help. I think there might be people here who are worried about that, or if you go and give some advice and the husband or the partner finds out, right? Or even after you've gotten out, you know, they come after you. What can be done to protect the victim, and what can be done to ensure justice as I read that is properly served?
Well, you need the police, and the PPOs will be helpful if that is a situation that you find yourself in. It's not 100% guarantee that the police will definitely do something, but you know, the fact that you have a PPO, it means that the police will take it more seriously. It's just that when they come, they might not take the action that you hope that they will take, but they certainly will come, and these protection orders mean that now the police have the power to act even when there's just a threat of violence, not necessarily actual violence, right? That's what the PPO is supposed to be about, that it gives the police the power to step in when there is a threat of violence, which in 1995, you couldn't have that. But in practice, as Natalie said, does that always happen? Sometimes not. Okay, but we would love to do some research on this, but it's actually quite difficult because no one has been, we found it hard to get the reports that police haven't been doing enough.
Access to the reports, yeah, not readily available. Okay,
No.
Cheryl has to leave us right now, so we're going to just take some time to say goodbye to Cheryl.
Bye.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Please continue.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you
and
so
thank you.
much, you know, for your
Take
input
care.
and for being with us and for helping us have a very deep and I think insightful discussion. You opened a lot of doors that people were too embarrassed or thought, okay, this might be a stupid question, should I ask it? But there you were asking those questions, and we've all been thinking them, and they were really good. I think now people feel a lot more informed and empowered. For those of you who don't feel enough empowerment, you know who to call. Karina's available. Where is
Please become members of Aware and keep supporting. Thank you so much.
Hey, keep doing the activism we can't do, okay?
Yeah, okay,
Spotlight on United.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
She doesn't leave quietly, does she? No, she doesn't.
No.
Okay, Georgette, I know that some of the work you do is with young girls, you know, helping
Yep.
them prepare in terms of STEM and education. But how about, you know, are there any programs to actually get younger kids, to educate them on domestic violence at a younger age? Maybe it should be part of the school curriculum.
Well, exactly. I think, you know, to this point, Karina's got these events coming up. She's already lined up 21st and was it 25th, right, Karina? That focus on this. We're actually working on developing a program. We're going to be launching it soon that will really focus on this whole point of, you know, whether it's a toxic masculinity, but addressing it when they're young. So whether you want to call it unconscious bias for boys, whether you want to talk about, you know, the sensitivities around language and communication and how they need to be able to understand the power of what they have at hand. We're working on that right now. Yes, you're absolutely right. It needs to start earlier. That's one of the things that we looked at in the research, right, that we conducted. It has to start earlier. We have to change the behavior, and we can only do that early on. So to this point again, if they keep seeing their fathers, uncles, grandfathers hit the women in their families, they're going to think that's okay. So we need to change that behavior. We need to allow them to understand and rethink. And part of that is not just saying it's wrong to hit the woman in the family, okay? That's just one aspect of it. It boils down really to them understanding the real value of women, right? Not just as mothers or aunts or sisters, but the value of women in the family, the community, into society at large, I think. And that's that goes part and parcel of what we're trying to do here. It's bringing out the value of women. And in the same time, we're hoping that also gives the incentive for women to understand that they need to step up too. They need to be brave like Natalie and take that first step because they are of value and they have worth. They must never feel downtrodden because of what a man says. So yes, there's a lot that needs to be done. It has to start earlier. We're working on that, just like Karina at Aware. You know, Karina's got the program addressing the enterprise workplace. We're actually launching something also for the workplace at the end of the year. And it must send a message. If both our organizations are looking at the very same things, there's a real need. There's a gap here and it needs to get fixed.
Yeah, and I totally agree.
I mean, I think that's... Were you going to say something, Karina?
Oh, it's Natalie.
Natalie, were you going to say something?
Just real quick, I'd just like to add on to what Georgette said. You know, it's very true because it's about belief system, and it's wrong to hit anyone, you know, and also be it woman or a man. You know, I feel that, you know, not just only women but also men who get hit upon. I mean, I to be honest, unless you're a bodybuilder woman, you know, your hit is not going to be as hard as a man. But you know, jokes aside, you know, it's also the man that gets trampled upon. You know, because we have different personality types, right? We can have like an introvert, a very soft-hearted boy, or a person that doesn't speak up, and you know, and I find it a lot of times as well. You know, when I kind of mention about the bullies themselves, they were bullied before, and that's why they're projecting it out subconsciously almost to other people. Yeah. And as much as we focus on helping the people who got bullied, I think as well we need to focus on how to help people who are the bullies, because then the cycle will stop. Because if we help a bullied, you know, she'll be or he'll be okay, right? But the person who is the root of the problem will go, you know, and do harm or hurt somebody else in the process. And if he or she doesn't get fixed or help needed, I think she or he will also be in a down spiral. And of course, you know, it's almost, I know it's going to be strange to say it, but a lot of times, and this is not ever brought up before, bullies can actually be sociopaths, because when they hurt somebody and they don't feel guilt, or when they don't feel sorry about it, it's a whole new level, and that's the dangerous part, because they'll never think that they're wrong.
Saying people in authority, basically, when you're enforcing that authority in a violent way, you think it's acceptable because of the position that's given to you. You feel that you're exerting the authority within the position given to you. But it's true what you said, that when you help a bullied person, you help that bullied person. But when you help a bully to understand the error of his ways, and to make that right, and to start valuing people, immediately you've stopped hundreds of people from being bullied. And that's a big, powerful thing. And I think we need to end right now, but very quickly, I really like what Georgette said, which very beautifully wraps up what we, the whole idea of this. We don't just want people to get help from being abused. It's not just about not doing something, right? It's about empowering people, or educating our children, our society, to do the right thing, to treat a human being, be it man or woman, with the respect and dignity he or she deserves. And that is what we need to teach, and that is very important. So you've seen the whole list of the whole array of things that are happening around these topics. So go ahead and sign up. If you are interested in connecting with us and participating in more events like this, I'm going to just very quickly share my screen. I can't share my screen. Vinu, I did put out the QR code which I sent you. Do you have it? With us, we are constantly having events like this. Like us, follow us, connect with us, and volunteer for AWARE. Georgette's got a lot of position and help needed with United Women Singapore. It's an awesome organization, so do connect with us. So there you go. Take out your phones. This is your second screen moment, people. Scan that code and it will take you straight to the KeyNote Women website. And on that note, I want to thank the women who've been on this panel with me, the speakers, for being so dynamic and honest and open. You've been awesome. Thank you, ladies. I've learned so much. We've come to the end of this session. And to all the attendees, thank you for patiently being with us through this extended journey. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.